I've got to step. I can see over. Good morning. My name is Donna Brown, and I am from Bethel Lutheran Church in White Rock, across the street from what I'll always call the Woman Home. And I have been there for approximately 60 years. Moved away for a couple of years and then always had to come back home. And although I am living in Prosperity, Newberry right now, I still travel back and forth to Bethel Lutheran because it's my home church. I want to thank the ladies for asking me to come today. You know, you don't ever think about your career or item or different things in your life that maybe you've had an impact on people until you're asked to do something like this, and then you have to think, oh my gosh, what can I share that's so special, or what can I say? So the first thing, my two greatest blessings in my life have been my two children. My daughter, of whom I am so proud of, has blessed me with 3 children. These 3 grandchildren have blessed me with 6 great grandchildren. So I am full of family on that side. And then my son, who is just so special to me. I went to visit him yesterday, and I live about an hour and a half from him. And I sat in amazement all afternoon because his wife and he are building their house with their own 2 hands. Little by little. So to sit there inside this building now and to watch them work all day long is such a blessing to see what my children have turned into. They have been a blessing in my life. And it kind of brings me to my career because I sang in a rock and roll band for many years of my life, and I was not in the Navy, but I sang for the Department of the Navy, and I was just so blessed because I traveled with the Department of the Navy all over the world. Iceland, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Vietnam, Spain. They just had me going in this band, traveling everywhere. And one of the things that I remember about doing this was at the end of each of our performances, and especially in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, we would ask, what would you like to end with? And they would always ask for something like Amazing Grace, How Great Thou Art, songs as simple as Jesus Loves Me. But we found out through all of this that these soldiers, and I keep referring especially to Guantanamo Bay because they were on this little island stuck. So they had no means of going around like in Iceland and Puerto Rico and in these other countries. And so their faith was right there. And we finally realized that this is what they wanted. So the last half hour of all of our performances, and I was over there 3 different times, we devoted the last part to nothing but singing songs that they wanted. Strictly gospel, because every kind of person and every kind of religion, as I guess you would say, was theirs with all of those men that were there. So over the thousands of men that I sang for over the years, I found out that their faith bound was in their music, and they wanted that. So we would always end with that. Well, after my son was born, my career with that ended quite abruptly. And I started doing volunteer work at Midlands Center, Department of Mental Retardation, Midlands Center on Farrell Road. And that was the only thing I knew to do at that point was to sing and bring a little bit of pleasure to these children. And it was a short while after that that the commissioner came to me and said, Donna, we're starting a program here at Business Center, and we would like to see if you would be interested in employment with us rather than volunteer work. And I said, sure, tell me what it's about. And he said, we are bringing in a group of young men. He referred to them as boys. And they are considered criminally retarded and criminally disturbed. And these boys cannot go into the prison system. They will not make it. And we want to start a program here with them. And I thought, what can I do with these boys? And they were wild, and they were mean, and they were angry, and they had had no love in their life. They were throwaways, as so many of those children at Midland Center were at the time I was there. But they were throwaways. They were very angry young men, all African American. And there were 14 of them. And I can remember thinking, Lord, what in the world am I going to do with these 14 wild men? You couldn't get control of them. They were very abrasive, very disrespectful, very threatening. And I would think, I can't do this. And I would go home at night and I would say, Lord, what am I going to do? And I decided to bring in children's Bible stories, to get these boys in a group and to start reading to them. And I soon found out they did not know how to read. Some of them could write their name, but that was pretty much it. And the first story I introduced them was David and Goliath. Because they were all trying to be big and bad, you know, and I wanted to show them that you don't have to be big and bad. You can just do it in a more calm way. And I introduced this particular story to them. And you could actually hear a pin drop because I had a big picture of this little boy and this giant of a man. And of course, who do you think you are in this picture? Oh, I'm a giant. You know, I'm a giant. And I think, well, we'll see about that after the end of the story. So I introduced, as weeks went by, stories to them. And they finally wanted to start learning to read these stories. I thought, well, they don't know how to read. What am I going to do? So we went back to the basics, and I gave them words from these different storybooks for them to memorize and learn these words. Well, after about a year or so, these, as I refer to them as young men, I didn't want to look at them as boys anymore because we had developed a relationship. They had memorized so many of these stories. And what they later realized was that they had learned these words. And they had actually learned to read some of these Bible stories on their own. And they were just, it was just amazing to watch them grow into young manhood, into young men, from these Goliaths into these Davids, the strong young men. And I would always tell them on Fridays, okay guys, I'll see y'all on Monday and I'll pray for y'all at church. Well, I came in one day and lo and behold, they were sitting all quiet, and I thought, what are they up to? Because I used to have to tell them, calm down, calm down. And they were sitting there all quiet, and they said, Miss Donna, we want to go to church. And I said, well, we have a chapel here. We can, this is Sunday, I'll take y'all to church if you want me to take you to church. They said, no, we want to go to your church. And then, oh my goodness, if you're criminally retarded, criminally disturbed, they've never been in a church in their life, what am I going to do with them? I sit in the choir, you know, I can't supervise them, but several weeks went by and they kept asking, and I knew they were serious. And so I went to my pastor at the time, and I told him what they wanted. And then I went to the commissioner, and I told him what they wanted, and he quickly declined, no, Donna, they can't. they can't do this. And I kept going back and going back and going back and saying, listen, they really want to do this. If we have security, please, let's give this a try. So finally, after several months, they let me take these young men in a van, unsupervised, to Bethel Lutheran Church. And honestly, I don't know if an African American had ever been in our church before. And I had talked with the choir, and of course, great conversations with the pastor. And I brought them in, and I set them on the front pew. And I said, now listen, guys, I'm in the choir. I'm not going to be able to sit here with you, so I'm going to have to trust you to behave and to act like young men. You're not Goliaths in this church. You're David. And I kept just drumming that story into them. So I left them, and I was a nervous wreck, to be honest with you, and got my robe on and came out, and they were all just quietly sitting on the front pew. I was so proud of them. And they would stand when we would stand, and they would sit when we would sit. And after church, they said, we want to learn the service. And I said, well, guys, you can't go with me every Sunday. We're just going to have to figure this out. But we can learn the service. And so I borrowed some books from the church, and I took these books, and I said, but you're going to have to memorize it and learn the words that way. And here again, they were learning words. They were putting words together and didn't even realize that they were doing this. So we decided I would take them to church once a month. And it became a ritual. Well, within about 6 months, these young men had literally memorized and learned number 4. Fourth setting in the church. And they would sing. It was absolutely amazing. I was just so proud of these young men. Some of them went on to get their GEDs. Some of them didn't turn out quite as well as we wanted to, but there were successes. And it was amazing how you could take a simple story or a hymn book, and they literally learned how to read by memorizing the Lutheran service. And I worked with these young men for 4 years. And during that 4-year period, I took them to a program that was started down at CCI. Before CCI was torn down, it was called Save the Children program. And I started taking them once a month down to CCI. And this group of inmates, these particular inmates, would take them down into the tunnels of CCI, and would take them into different sections of CCI, and they were very protected. But I wanted to see what they were seeing, because women had never been allowed to go down into the tunnels of CCI, where the actual living inmates were, where the heat was by steamers that came out, no air conditioning, and it was just unbelievable. And finally they let me go down into the tunnels of CCI, and I was the first female to enter the tunnels of CCI. And as I took them once a month, it got to where I was going down into the tunnels, and I was approached by the warden after a period of time about a program, again, that they were starting down at CCI, and they wanted women to see if they could work directly with male inmates and to work in the tunnels at CCI. And I had to give this a lot of thought, and I had to give this a lot of prayer, because I was so involved with my young men at Midland Center. I didn't want to leave them, and I didn't want to make them feel abandoned in any way to set them back. So it took me a little while, a lot of thought and prayer, and I even went and spoke with my pastor about it. Do I try this? Do I do this? And I decided to make a career change. And I went to work with the Department of Corrections. And it was a sad day leaving Midlandton and leaving the young men, but it was also another journey that I had to make in my life as a female. And as a woman, as a grown woman, to take that leap of faith, to go into these waters and sink or swim, I had to depend on whether or not I was going to be able to sink or swim in this program. And so I decided to do this, and there were 25 women that were hired for this program. 15 of us made it through. And I found out after we made it through this program and became a correctional officer, not a security guard, but a correctional officer in a brown uniform, not flattering at all, that I wanted more. I wasn't satisfied. Because going through the academy, we were shunned. We were not wanted there as correctional officers. The program was literally set up to fail. But there were some of us that said, no, we're going to get through this. And sometimes we were treated so rudely, and it was just, I would go home and I would cry, and I would wonder if I'd made the right decision. But something said, no, Donna, you go through that 6 weeks of basic training, and you see how you like this. So I did, and I realized during training, of my training, that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to become a trainer in the Department of Corrections. And I did. I took every course I could possibly take. I was going to night school down at USC for a criminal justice degree. Every class I could take, only female, I'd be in these classes. And I learned defensive tactics, I learned report writing, I learned firearms, I learned PR-24, everything I could possibly learn. And there was a training position that was coming open. And I said, this is going to be good. I'm going to apply for this training position. And I went to several interviews, and there were several little comments about, oh, if she gets this, you know what she's going to have to do to be able to get this position. And I thought, no, women can do what they set their minds to do because that's who we are. We're made in God's image. And as I went through all of these trainings over the years and applied for my staff development and training specialist, they called it, I first began with some smaller institutions, and then CCI was being torn down. And there was a new prison being built, and it was called, at the time, Royal River Correctional Institution. It would house close to 3,000 inmates. It included the death row, the electric chair, lethal injection, and it also included reception and evaluation. So I applied for this position, never thinking that I would receive it, but I wanted to get some experience in interviewing for positions. And it got down to 5, and then it got down to 4. And they said, Donna, it's got down to 3, you're still in the running. And I said, oh, yay. You know, it got down to 2. Donna, you're still in the running. And so one day I was asked to go down to Kirkland, and I met with the deputy warden, Mr. Bean. And he said, Donna, would you like to be the first staff development and training specialist female in the state of South Carolina for a maximum security institution to include death row? And I was in awe. I couldn't answer it first because I never, ever expected to receive a position like this. And I went home and I talked with my mom and my dad about it. And Mama, she just didn't quite know about this, but I said, Mama, I'm going to accept this position. I just want to see if I can do this. And I watched this prison being built. And one day we went down and Mr. Bean called me and he said, Donna, they had me housed at Kirkland in an office there while I was waiting for my institution to be built. And he took me down one day, he said, I want to show you something. And we went down where the institution was being built, and there were caskets where it had a big rain, and there were caskets just sitting all out where our institution was to be built. And we later found out that this is where so many inmates had been buried that had no family. And these were, inmates from way, way, way back, wooden coffins that had half rotted. And he said, this is what we're building on, Donna. This is what we're building on. And first thing that came to mind was, on Christ the solid rock I stand, not above the ground is sinking sand. And I said, Mr. Bean, this is sinking sand. How in the world are we going to build a maximum security institution on this sinking ground? That it was awful. Well, to make a long story short, of course, they got all of this done and built this institution. And I remember while I was in Kirkland, they had me in this office with a window. And on the side of the window was a little courtyard. And the inmates would be out in the courtyard. It was a very small courtyard. And I remember looking out one day, and there was another inmate stabbing another inmate. And I was just like, oh, I was just panicking. And called the emergency number and let them know what was going on. And they came up. And a few weeks later, I looked out the window and there was another stabbing. And I said, oh my gosh, here we go again. And I called. And I share this with you because we become so kind of unaware of our surroundings. We just get used to our living environment. So by the third stabbing, I'm picking up the phone and I'm saying, y'all, we've got another stabbing here in the courtyard. We really need to do something. This is getting bad. This is the third one. And I realized then that I was becoming too used to this kind of living, and I needed to get in prayer about this because this is not normal to start feeling so deja vu about watching a stabbing. And so I had to do a lot of praying about this, and I started thinking, well, maybe this is not for me. And I again talked with my pastor, and he said, no, Donna, follow through. So again, I followed through, and I became the first staff development and training specialist in South Carolina for Broad River, which was the maximum institution at the time, with death row. And I wondered how I was going to work and train people to work on death row, because people would ask me, Donna, being a Christian, how can you justify teaching people to work with inmates that are on death row that you know are going to be put to death? And I remembered then that in the Bible it says that we have to put our armor on. And sometimes we do have to fight evil, and we do have to interact with evil. So when our institution was built, and I was doing all of this training, women were starting to come through then to work on the yards and to work in the housing developments and everything with the inmates. And they would say to me during basic training, and I was known as Miss B, Miss Brown, they would say, Miss B, but you don't get it. You're sitting here in a classroom. You're not out in the yards and around with the inmates. You don't know how it is. And some of my assistant instructors would say, wait a minute, Donna came over on the covered wagon with the Department of Corrections. Donna was one of the first of 25 women that made it, that led the road to where you are able to come to work and work on the yards and everything at that point. During my training, we were the first maximum security institution to become certified in training. So that was a very, very big accomplishment for me, but something was still missing, and I just couldn't quite put my finger on what was missing. And I went to my pastor one day and I said, Pastor Potter, we do not have any Lutheran pastors coming to Broad River. And I would like for us to do a service at Broad River. Because it brought me back to when I was taking my young men to Bethel and what it did for them being at Bethel. And Pastor Potter said, well, Donna, that's fine with me. If you can get it approved, let's do it. So I went before our choir because we wanted them to come. I wanted a full service. I went before our congregation and asked them about this. And I had surprisingly that so many people wanted to be involved in this. And I went to the warden and I told the warden what I wanted to do, that I wanted to bring the choir, I wanted to bring church members, and I wanted them to celebrate Holy Communion, which meant we would be bringing wine into the institution. Finally, we got it approved. And we had our first actual Lutheran church service at Broad River Correctional Institution. And it was during Christmas. And I took pictures to pass around of our chrismon trees. We have 2 chrismon trees that we put up at church. And that night we had 126 inmates that came to the church service. The choir processed in through the visiting. We had it in the visiting room because the chapel wouldn't hold that many. So we had it in the visiting room, and they processed in with the cross, and we had an altar set up with the candles and as much as we could. Had the piano brought in, and we did a complete service with communion. So many of these men had never celebrated Holy Communion. They didn't know what a hymn book even looked like. And it was an amazing evening for these inmates. They had a little trouble with the Apostles' Creed because of the word Catholic in the Apostles' Creed. They weren't too sure about that. But other than that, they just thoroughly enjoyed themselves. And I said, bingo, this is what was missing with me. I was not bringing my faith as a woman into my work. And I needed to do something about that. And so that got me thinking. And I went to a few of the inmates and I said, how would y'all like to make chrismons? They didn't know what chrismons were until I showed them these pictures of the chrismons that we had at our church during Christmas. And I thought, well, I'll get a few, that might be interested. And I went to a lady that had made so many of our chrismons that was retiring, getting out of the business, and she had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chrismons that she needed to get rid of. They were just taking up space. And she said, Donna, take these. She said, now I don't have the pearls and the decorations, but take these and see what you can do with them. So I put out flyers around the institution that we were going to start chrismon classes, and the curiosity was unbelievable because it allowed them to get out of their dorms at night, and it allowed them to come and sit in a peaceful environment. And to make a long story short, I went to the warden and I said, "Warden, staff development and training specialist." I said, "What does that mean to you in terms of Board of Correctional Institution?" And his mind thought, and mine as well, was just strictly with the officers and the staff, the employees. And I said, "We've got money in our training budget." I said, can I use some of that money for the inmates? I want to get beads, I want to get ribbons, I want to get things, and I want to decorate Christmas trees. I think I'll get some good response. We ended up, from that January to that Christmas, these inmates worked one night a week in the building that I was in. One night a week I stayed with them, and they created over 500 Christmas. They learned the stories of these Christmas. And I remember at that Christmas, I went to the warden and I said, "Warden, we need a Christmas tree." He said, "Oh, that's not a problem, we can get a Christmas tree." I said, "No, we need a big Christmas tree." And he said, "How big?" And I said, "Enough to hold over 500 Christmas. Can we handle that?" He said, "No, that's a big tree." I said, "Yeah, you got that right. That is a very big tree." And it was a humongous tree. And it took us weeks to decorate that Christmas tree in the visiting room. But can you imagine inmates learning from Christmas, learning what each Christmas meant? They knew it better than I did. I said, "I forget what this would mean, guys. What does this mean?" And they would tell me. And we ended up with having to have one group one Wednesday night and another group another Wednesday night, because we didn't have the security to have all of those inmates in this one room together. So we had to end up splitting it up. And they created over 500 Christmas, and it was the most beautiful tree I had ever seen. And we put it in the visiting room, and we had to use a long, tall ladder to get up to the top of the Christmas tree. And I knew then, okay, I can actually incorporate my faith as a woman to these men. So I guess I'm just sharing this with you today because it's WELCA Sunday. I'm so proud to be a part of WELCA. This is my last year of being president of the women at Bethel. But I'm so proud to be a disciple, a woman, and be a disciple, and to be able to try to, what I did in my career that made it so special. And when I was asked to come today, I thought, gosh, I don't have a script. I don't do anything like that, because I find that the more I tell and the more I share, the more I want to go on and on and on, so I ain't going to stop. But I did finally retire after I retired from corrections. I don't know if they still use the Christmas tree, but I do know that they did for 10 years after I left Broader Correctional Institution. And then I did a small 5 years with Red Cross. And I was a platelet recruiter. And I found out that I had what was called baby's blood. And so it was very important for me to be able to give blood and to work for the Red Cross for the few years that I did, and to recruit people to go and give platelets and blood. And so I finally retired from that, and that was it. I'm done. I hope during work, but that's my life. That's my sharing of my faith, and what I've tried to do over the years. I like to think about my successes and not my failures, because when I think about successes, it makes you want to move forward. It makes you want to take another leap. It makes you want to take another chance at doing something new and doing something different. So that's who I am, Donna Brown. Try to be a disciple, and that's it. That's where I am. Thank you so much for having me today. I do appreciate it.